Hi, Thilo.
I think it's so packed here because you're talking about love and money. I think it's a good combination.
Absolutely. And is there a better way to kind of close the growth stage than love and money? So Thilo, I'm just going to directly pass it on to you. So the topic is how to make investors fall in love. And first of all, why should startups even really care about this? I mean, do we need investors to love us?
I think falling in love with investors is like with falling in love in real life. I think nobody here goes into a bar and sees a beautiful girl or boy and says, well, do you want to marry me, right? It's not an event, it's a process. And I think that's what we all have to realize. And I think what we mean is love is a good chemistry, a good connection, because what all investors will agree, it's all about the team first and foremost. Of course, there are other things also. I mean, I'm an investor by myself. That's why I have a bit of two hats on. Yeah. It's, of course, also about, do they have the good numbers? Have they good traction? Are they just locally focused or global, etc.? There are a lot of other factors. But of course, if there's no chemistry and you don't like each other, and by the way, this is also something that is very relevant for the startups, because you have to work with them over many, many years, yeah? Like 10 years and more, maybe, yeah? You have to give them reportings. There may be also crisis situations, right? It's like in a marriage, right? Yeah. This is also not only sunshine, there's also sometimes rain. And that's why, again, it's not an event, it's a process. And that's why these kind of events are important to get to know each other, but also good communication and storytelling, what we're talking about today.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. It's a journey you're going on to, 10 years. That is a marriage. For some people, that's perhaps the longest relationship they've been in. But yeah, why should they really care about doing this very well? I mean, of course, we want a good relationship to our investors, but is there also an ROI of this?
I mean, ROI and communication is a little bit like asking for ROI for your mother, right? This is a bit like a tricky part. Yeah. But I think fundamentally we have a lot of startups here in this room, and a startup is, in the end of the day, often a blank sheet of paper, an idea, a domain, and the founder, what else you have, right? Often not big numbers. And in the end of the day, the narrative, the storytelling is a big part of what your valuation in the end of the day makes. And I think all founders are interested in a good valuation, and storytelling is a very, very important part. So on the one hand, of course, you have to be convincing and have to, if your number right, you have to show that people like your product, does their product market fit, etc. That part is clear. But the narrative, that's the second part of the formula. So you can say numbers plus narrative equals the valuation. So this is often why, for example, when you go to the US and you're working with an M&A consultancy, etc., they often ask you, who's your publicist, right? Because they want to know who's telling your story in the market, or how you are prepared to tell your story, and what is your story. Because in the end of the day, often you're not alone with your idea, right? There are also competitions within the startups, or you're competing with the big corporates, right? So there's always competition. And how do you set yourself apart? And we see always when there are great founders, great personalities, great storytellers, be it Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, etc. They are known, they stand for something, they're very clear in their messaging, they are very reliable, they're very consistent in their messaging. And I think this is something that also young founders can learn from the big guys, that this is very, very important. And I mean, as you can see, Elon Musk can shake the stock market with one tweet, right? And we, as founders here in the room that looking for funding, need to create a kind of magnetism in the community, the kind of fear of missing out. And I think this is something that fundamentally often is underestimated, that often they're thinking about, oh God, how many journalists we can send our message, and they do a little bit like spray and pray. Mm-hmm. And I think this is the wrong approach, right? You have to also think about how can your story spark curiosity. The people say, oh, I've heard of this startup, everyone is talking about it, right? Creating these kind of magnetism that is like when you at work or in a bar, again, everyone is talking about this one guy because he has this beautiful whatever eyeglasses or special shoes or special jacket or whatever, right? Yeah. And creating this kind of situation, I think, is very, very important. And I think everyone should be very, very clear about what is my story. And every founder here in the room, I'm sure, is able to write 1 page, 2 pages, 3 pages, what is company about, why is it better than the competition, etc. I'm very sure about that. But this is not the goal. The goal is to say it in one sentences. And I call it always the party pitch, right? When I come to a party and see you, Dennis, and say, hey, Dennis, how are you? What are you doing, right? You have not time, half an hour to explain me what you do, right? You have to say, I do this and that, and what you want is, no matter if I'm a friend, an investor, or a journalist, my reaction is, oh, that's interesting, tell me more. Mm-hmm. And this is something that is not about the length, it's about coming to the point. When we all know the saying, unique selling proposition, but we're talking here about what is really your unique selling story, right? What is really the one line of story that everyone says, oh, that sparks the curiosity, right? That's what we want. And then that helps, of course, then in the next step. And no matter if you tell your story in a podcast or the channels doesn't matter, right? It's about the story first. And if that's strong enough, then we can talk about what is the right channels, where are the investors, are you a fintech, then you should maybe more talking on a fintech media, etc. That's then a different part. But often founders come and say, oh, can you bring me to TechCrunch? Can you bring me to Wall Street Journal, etc. I said, that's the wrong question, right? Let's start first. What is your goal? What do you actually want? And what is your industry? And what is your story? And then we can talk about, is it LinkedIn? Is it TechCrunch? Is it whatever? Yeah.
Right. Wonderful. Yeah, I love that, the party pitch, because often we teach about the elevator pitch, and that's like 60, 90 seconds. But if you're at a party, nobody's going to be there and listen to you for 60 to 90 seconds. You have 1-2 sentences to be interesting, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm just curious, like, how many founders do we have here in the room? All right, that's a bunch. How many investors? All right, we also have a couple of investors.
It's like in a bar, right? 2 girls and 50 boys here.
Yeah. I also like that bar thing, you know. It comes to mind that a bar needs to have a long line out the door.
Things in life are always the same, right? If it's in private life, right, it's always about, also in business, right? It's about long-term relationship, not one-night stands. I mean, at least in business, right? Privately, we don't talk about that today. But I think this is very important to keep that in mind. And investor by myself, know how it is, right? If you are too demanding, and it's like in sales, you can also compare it with sales, right? Maybe another analogy, right? If you're chasing a cat, the cat runs away. If you have something the cat wants, the cat comes to you. Mm-hmm. And you can apply this again to all these different kind of situation. And sometimes it starts with very little things. Do your research first about the investors. I get every day approached on LinkedIn, on email, people sending me their pitches. I was like, have you actually read what I'm doing? Mm-hmm. And why don't you tailor it and tell me where I am the right investor for you, right? Because you say, maybe in my case, tell me why PR, branding, storytelling is so important for you. Why does it matter right now? Why should we, right? Tell me that and not just give me a bunch of numbers and say, hey, I want your money, right? Tell me why you choose me and why I can provide value to your company and to your success, right? Because that's what all investors want, that they, of course, money you can get everywhere, but you want to also kind of value add, right? Yeah. What is the value add and why do you need my value add, right? Or you're just desperate and want money and 10 others have already said no, that's why you're writing me, right? And of course you would never tell me, but that's a feeling that I'm getting, right? And that's the same with journalists. When you read out to journalists and they're getting, what do you think how many press releases a journalist per day gets? Any numbers? Very good. It's roughly around 500, but thinking about 500 pitches for journalists per day. And if you're working, by the way, for TechCrunch and the global media, it's more like going up to 1,000. Imagine 1,000 press releases in your inbox. How do you choose, right? What is the story? That means if you're not able to tell your story in the subject line or make the subject line so interesting, and I mean, of course, you can maybe envision that they don't know all the 1,000 people. Of course, their personal contract is something different, right? Sure. But many experts then write in the subject line things like for immediate release or press release, waste, right? Yeah. So this is it doesn't work like that, right? So it all comes down to really be clear about your unique one-liner, what is the story that you want to tell me? And also, I mean, we all have very limited time, right? You open the LinkedIn messages, you talk to an investor here at the floor, you have just 30 seconds on a phone with the journalist. How do you spark curiosity? How can you make them fall in love, right? They say, oh my God, that's interesting, that's really fascinating, I should meet more, right? And this is a bit like understanding what also the things are the journalist's interests, right? Is it timely? Is it the right timing right now? Often I read press releases where I say, the story is nice, but I can write about it now, I can write about it in a month, I can write about it in 3 months. There is no urgency, and creating urgency is also a very, very important part. And also when you think, is there a kind of fear of missing out? Do you give me something exclusive? Or you're talking also to 10 other journalists, right? Or same with investors, right? Are you just talking to me and choose me, and I'm your first choice, or you're actually, I heard from the community, actually been also to 20 other investors, and they all said no, and now you're ending up on my table. It always comes down to the same things, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's already a lot in there that is good advice for founders, but I want to get down to a little bit more practical advice. So we already saw there's a bunch of founders here. How many of you are seed stage founders, kind of looking for your first investment still? All right, that is a couple. So if I would be one of those seed stage founders, like what would be, like the first steps that I would need to take, really practical, to get on top of this?
I mean, first realizing that PR is not marketing, right? It's not about like you making an ad or giving 5,000 euro to Google and you're getting 5,000 clicks, things like that. That's not how it works, right? So first of all, I would really, as time, of course, is often limited and money is limited, really focus, right? In which industry am I? What are the publications and the media and the events, the investors that I want to go with? Let's assume you are a fintech company. Thinking about what are the 2-3 main fintech events where I can meet all these investors? What are the 2-3 channels, newsletters, industry organizations, blogs that are read by the fintech industry? I can tell you, we had last week the situation, we worked with a startup together and had an interview with the founder in Finance Forward. I don't know if everyone is familiar here in Germany, very prestigious fintech media. Very niche, very focused on this one industry, but after this one article, they had 6 calls from high-level, high-profile investors, right? And this was one article. We don't talk about spray and pray again. Right. It is very, very, very focused, right? And also here, how do you get the attention from the journalist? You have to have, of course, something unique, right? Is it a David against Goliath thing, right? You find out the old traditional banks because you have to invent it like a new fancy open banking system, whatever, or you have made a great hire where everyone is like, wow, how this little young startup could convince this great guy, or you have maybe often you have, before you have your first institutional round with a VC, maybe some friends and family VCs that have already some good contacts in the industry that you can leverage on. It's not about quantity, it's about quality, right? And spend time on really thinking, what is my, let's stress this again, the party pitch, right? How can I convince in 2-3 sentences where they say, that's an interesting story? Because keep in mind, the journalists write for their readers, not for you. The job from a journalist is not to make advertising for you. They are responsible for their readers. And if it's not interesting for their readers, they will, of course, not write about you, right? So this is very, very important to realize that how these dynamics also work. Because sometimes I have founders that call me and say, yeah, but they need content every day, right? Why don't they appreciate when we're sending them? It's like, yeah, because they're getting 1,000 offerings, right? Their day has also just 24 hours, right? And it is, it's really a tough job. That why it is also here that we're calling it earned media, right? It's not owned media, my own newsletters, website, etc. It's not paid media, but you're just booking an advertising, and also not shared media like your LinkedIn. It is earned media. You have to earn it, right?
Nice. Very good. Yeah, I think that is really what startups need to do overall. If they're still in that stage, you need to earn everything. You need to earn your first customers. You need to kind of earn the media that you get. Yeah. And what about those companies that are a little bit further away? I mean, other than, of course, hiring you, like, do you have like maybe a trick
always
or
a good
two?
idea. It's always a good idea.
But do you have like maybe a trick or two that you can share with them out of the toolbox for free today?
Of course. I mean, first of all, what for both stages is relevant is don't underestimate the effect of personal branding, because you are, in a startup as a founder, the most valuable asset, not only for the investors, but also for the storytelling. Because in the end of the day, it's you. People choosing you as a founder because they think, even your startup, and they don't even know if in 6 months you still exist or whatever can happen in startup life, right? But they're choosing you as leader. That means you are the person where people say, oh, that's an interesting guy. He has a good vision. He knows what he's doing, what he's talking about. I want to work for this guy, right? This kind of magnetism you have also to create. Same for the investors, same for the journalists. You have to stand for something. You have to be reliable, clear and very precise about your message and what you're telling the market. So this is something where I would say for both, that has nothing to do with money, that has something to do that you are also the CEO of your own brand, right? This is your responsibility. And it's not about vanity and being on the front page of a fancy newspaper. It's about business, right? It's about creating value for your company. That is fundamentally important to know. Second, what can you do? You can, of course, also build here long-term relationships with journalists, and also here, not just going spray and pray, really target the journalists that are relevant for your business. And both. Think about every story has different dynamics and different angles. You can tell a story from the investor's point of view. You can tell a story from a client point of view. You can tell a story from employer branding point of view, because we're all looking for the best talent, right? So this is also not to underestimate, to think about where can you tell which story where. And third, I would say, which is very important, is to understand that PR is not press releases. There are tons of other tools and possibilities that you have, and it is not about sending out press releases. This is often the treadmill. Founders get, what is our next press release? That is not what it's about, right? It's first and foremost about a great stories. And sometimes, when I post something on LinkedIn, it has more reach than some industry newspaper, etc. So you have to make clear what are the channels that are really relevant for you and what is your goal. Because in the end of the day, we have, for example, often situations where we, for example, talk with the sales team and say, sales team, what do you actually want to win customers, for example, right? How can we help you, right? So, for example, if the founder has here a great interview, why don't you use this interview as a great piece of content to get in touch with prospects again, right? Or maybe we can help you with storytelling and crafting some LinkedIn posts for you. So I want to say storytelling is not just PR and targeting journalists. A great story helps in many ways. It can be case studies, it can be white papers, that can be for personal branding, for working with influencers together, and also here. Many people think influencer relation, they're thinking about the Instagrammers that showing their travel pictures and having a lot of likes. Influencers are also people who can help you from industry organizations, from event organizers that put you on stage in front or give you airtime here at an event. That can be also policy makers, right? Especially when you're maybe in the fintech or health tech or in highly regulated areas. So communications can help in very, very many ways. And many founders often complain about long sales cycles, right? Especially when you're B2B or SaaS company, etc. But PR and good branding can also help here, right? Because when you make, the higher the price the product has, the more, of course, people do research. And when they're typing in on Google the name of your product or your company, and there's nothing than just your own advertising, your own website, obviously they are suspicious. Yeah. But if there are interviews from serious newspapers, or you have appearance in a podcast, or whatever it is, of course, it gives trust. And in the end of the day, it's all about trust. And often startups don't compete with themselves, they compete with the traditional corporates that they want, of course, steal business with. We're all talking about disruption here at this conference. But in the end of the day, what we actually want is exactly building this bridge between a company, and let's stick to the fintech example. We all have a bank account with a traditional bank. We trust them, they exist since 100 years. And now the neobanks come, right? They say we are more fancy, we have an app, blah, 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 blah. But it's a startup. Can we trust them our money, etc.? And your job as a founder is to build this bridge, right? This is what the uncertainty gap that we have to fill. And the only answer here is trust. Mm-hmm. And by the way, trust, recent study came out, only 32% of people believe in advertising. So advertising alone, and we know all the prices go up when you do Google ads and Instagram, etc. Advertising alone is never the answer. It's the combination. So it's not, do I do performance marketing or do I do PR? That's not how the game works.
And well, trust, we're back to our word here, the keyword love. I think those are really, that trust is the key for that, right?
And people trust people, right? Yeah. People are interested in people. So coming back to the topic of personal branding, right? Yeah. I mean, what is more trustworthy than a human being, yeah. Right? Looking them in the eyes, see say, oh, this person stands for the company. And founders often, especially here in Europe, and you know we represent a lot of Silicon Valley companies, Stripe, GitHub, Shopify, etc. So the founders really play here a mission-critical role in their story. Here in Europe, often the founders say, yeah, but I want to let my product speak. My product is so wonderful. And look at my product, etc. Yeah, but the product can't speak, right? Human beings are that we are trusting and that speak, right? And especially when you're a startup and not have the money for a big branding campaign, etc. It is the founder, and we need to put the founder at the center stage, literally, right? And don't underestimate it. And often when I talk with founders, yeah, Thilo, I understand what you're doing, but you know, we are just a boring B2B company. Would GitHub, would Shopify, would Stripe, would you name it, Evernote refer to them as a boring B2B company? Absolutely not, right? But here in Europe, often, also another complaint that I often hear from founders is, yeah, but the journalist always writing about the other company, but we are, let's say, cheaper or have the better product or whatever, to say, what is it actually worth to be the best when others sell better? And think about that, right? This is easy to complain, but it's not about being the best. That's actually a good message for the startups, right? It is about being a great storyteller and tell your story and be louder and be heard and be seen from people that are relevant for your business and bring you the growth that you need to get to the next level.
Brilliant. Thilo, unfortunately our time is already up. I would have loved to also put a Q&A out to the audience, but perhaps you have a few minutes that you can spend with whoever wants to grab you.
Or
not
follow me on LinkedIn
course,
or on all the channels that are available, so feel free.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for this.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure.
Thank you. Let's give Thilo...